Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking a relationship that sounds incredibly simple on the surface, but when you actually peel back the layers, it's it's honestly one of the messiest dynamics in the world.
Yeah, it really is.
We're talking about the link between a country's bank account and a woman's everyday life.
Right. It's that classic modernization hypothesis. The idea that if you just pour money into an economy, raise the GDP, build the factories, pave the roads, gender equality will just naturally follow.
Like an automatic software update?
Exactly. Like it just installs itself once you reach a certain tax bracket.
Right. We tend to assume wealth equals, progress.
Yeah.
The richer a country gets, the better things must be for women automatically.
Yeah.
But the stack of research we're looking at today, which covers everything from global wage gaps to demographic shifts and microfinance, it kind of pokes some serious holes in that theory.
It definitely does.
We are seeing from the sources that while development changes the nature of inequality, it doesn't necessarily erase it.
Yeah, it transforms the problems. You stop worrying about access to basic literacy or survival, and you start worrying about the glass ceiling.
Or the motherhood penalty.
Exactly. The game changes, but the difficulty level doesn't necessarily drop.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to map this journey for you. We'll start with what we're calling the engine of change, how industrialization flips the script on education and family structure.
Right.
Then we're going to look at the sticky floor and that infamous glass ceiling, why the wage gap persists even when women are statistically more educated than men.
And we absolutely cannot forget the toolkit. We'll wrap up by looking at specific economic interventions like microloans that are trying to hack the system from the bottom up in developing regions.
Right, let's dive into the data. So the source material outlined a general rule of thumb for economic development. As a country moves from a subsistence economy to an industrial one, women essentially move out of the house.
It's a fundamental shift in labor demand. In the earliest stages of development, think subsistence, agriculture women are often working incredibly hard.
Right, they aren't just sitting around.
Oh, not at all. They are farming, fetching water, managing the entire household. But it's domestic, and it's often unpaid or informal farm labor.
Which means it's invisible.
Exactly. It is invisible in the GDP. It doesn't show up on any official spreadsheet.
But as the economy heats up, factories open, the service sectors expand, the market suddenly really needs those hands.
Yes. The opportunity cost of staying home just becomes too high. The economy acts like a magnet pulling labor into the formal sector. But here's where we see the first major divergence between the developing world and the developed world.
And it all hinges on one massive variable.
Education.
Yeah, this was the part of the research that I found really stark. In less developed contexts, there is this rigid gender hierarchy regarding who actually gets to go to school.
Right.
And it's not just culture operating in a vacuum. It's pure economics.
It comes down to a brutal economic calculation for families living in extreme poverty. If you have 5 kids and you can only afford school fees and uniforms for one of them...
You have to pick the one with the highest potential return on investment.
Precisely. And in a society where men control the land and the money...
You pick the boy.
You pick the boy. He is the future asset. The girl is viewed, economically speaking, as a temporary member of the household who will eventually belong to her husband's family. So the investment flows to the male. It is a rational decision within an irrational system.
But, and this is the big twist in the data, when you look at the stats for fully developed economies like the United States or parts of Europe, that dynamic doesn't just disappear, it completely inverts.
It really does. In the United States, we're currently seeing a ratio of about 60-40 in favor of women in higher education.
60-40.
Yeah. Women are earning the majority of bachelor's, master's, and even doctoral degrees.
That is a massive shift. So in a mature economy, women are actually the more credentialed sex. Why the flip? Is it just that cultural barriers have lowered? Or is there an economic driver there too?
It's largely about the types of jobs available. As manufacturing declines, which historically didn't require a degree and was heavily male-dominated, the service and knowledge economy expands.
Right.
And to get a foot in the door there, you need a degree. Women recognized that signal faster and adapted.
They got the credentials because they had to.
Exactly.
But this leads to what the sources point to as a demographic dominant effect. I really love this concept because it shows how a decision made in a high school classroom impacts the entire population structure of a nation.
It is simple chain logic. If a woman is in college until she's 22 and then wants to establish a career for 5 years to pay off loans or secure a position...
She isn't starting a family at 18.
Right. Marriage is delayed, childbearing is delayed.
And logically, the number of children drops. You just have a smaller window of time.
Drastically. You see this in the population pyramids. In developed nations, the base of the pyramid, the kids, is shrinking. We are barely replacing ourselves.
Contrast that with the data on sub-Saharan Africa. The source highlights Nigeria specifically as a counterexample here.
Nigeria is a classic example of the other side of the coin. The economic development is at an earlier stage, female education rates are much lower, and consequently, the fertility rate is much higher.
The source said it was averaging over 6 children per woman during her childbearing years.
Yes, 6 children versus, say, 1.3 in Japan. That is a completely different life trajectory.
That's totally different.
And it creates a massive challenge for those developing economies. When you have that many young people, you have what demographers call a youth bulge.
Right.
If you can employ them, it's a demographic dividend. Huge economic growth. But if you can't, it's a recipe for social instability.
Meanwhile, the developed world is trying to figure out who is going to pay for the pensions because there aren't enough young workers coming up.
Exactly. It's a completely flipped scenario.
Okay, so we've established that wealth changes the demographic makeup. Women get educated, families get smaller. That sounds like the definition of progress. It sounds like we've solved the equation.
It does sound like that.
But this is where we have to hit the brakes. Because if education levels are higher for women in developed countries and they are delaying families to work, you would assume, you would logically bet money that the wage gap would be closed by now, or maybe even reversed.
You would definitely assume that, but the data says absolutely not.
Let's unpack this wage gap. It's a controversial topic. You hear people argue it's a myth, or they say it's just about personal choices. But the source material we are using today is very specific about how this is actually calculated.
Right. So the headline number usually cited for the U.S., and this is consistent with the sources, is around 82 cents on the dollar, women earning roughly 82% of what men earn.
Okay.
Now, the skeptics will immediately say, well, that's just because women choose lower-paying careers. They go into teaching instead of engineering.
And to be fair, the sources acknowledge occupational segregation is real. We do see women clustered in so-called pink-collar jobs, nursing, education, secretarial work.
Yes.
And we know those fields historically pay less than male-dominated trades or finance.
It's real, and it is a factor, but that doesn't explain the whole gap. The most damning data in the source material is when they control for that, when they look at the exact same job with the exact same education.
The lawyer example. This one really stuck with me.
Yes, the lawyers. Take a male lawyer and a female lawyer. Same law school tier, same passing of the bar exam, same firm size. You would think, okay, billable hours are billable hours.
Right.
But the gap is still there.
Why? If they're doing the exact same work, where does the disparity even come from?
It often comes down to what economists call temporal flexibility.
Temporal flexibility.
Yeah. High-paying jobs like law, finance, corporate management were often greedy jobs. They disproportionately reward people who are available 24/7.
And because of social norms, available 24/7 usually means someone who doesn't have primary childcare duties.
Bingo. Even today, the data shows that in developed nations, women still shoulder the vast majority of unpaid care work.
Wow.
So the male lawyer can take the 8 p.m. conference call because someone else is doing bath time. The female lawyer often cannot.
So the motherhood penalty kicks in.
Hard. And it's not just about moms either. It's a structural devaluation. Even if a woman doesn't have children, there is often an implicit bias that she might, or that her commitment is viewed differently.
Right.
And this bleeds directly into the next major issue, the glass ceiling.
Yeah, the leadership numbers are honestly shocking. We just said women are earning 60% of the degrees. You would think they'd be running at least 40% of the companies.
Not even close. The source cites that among the world's top 500 highest-earning corporations, only about 5% are led by women.
5%. That's a statistical error, basically. That is vanishingly small.
It is. It tells us that women have achieved participation. They are in the building, they are doing the work, they are in middle management, but they haven't achieved power. They aren't running the building.
It's the difference between being invited to the party and being allowed to choose the music.
Precisely. And this brings up the sticky floor concept, too. It's not just that they can't reach the top. It's that they are often stuck in those support roles we mentioned earlier.
Like human resources.
Right. A huge percentage of HR directors are women. A tiny percentage of CEOs are women. It is very hard to jump from HR to CEO. The pathway is structurally blocked.
So in the developed world, we have highly educated women running into structural walls and caregiving traps. The money is there, but the parity isn't. Now, I want to pivot back to the developing world, because while the problems there are different, often about basic survival and access, the solutions being tested are really fascinating.
Right. In a rural village in a developing nation, the barrier isn't the glass ceiling at a law firm. It's the fact that you can't walk into a bank and get a loan to buy a goat or a sewing machine.
Because you have no collateral.
Yeah.
You don't own the land your husband does. You don't have a credit score. You are essentially invisible to the formal financial system.
Exactly. You are unbankable by traditional standards. And this is where the concept of microloans comes in.
This is the model that really changed the conversation on international aid, right? Instead of just giving food or supplies, you give capital.
Yes, microloans or microlending. We are talking about small amounts, sometimes just $50 or $100, given specifically to women in rural or low-income areas to start small businesses.
But why target women specifically? Is it just about fairness, or is there an economic strategy there?
Oh, it is highly strategic. The source highlights a really distinct behavioral difference between how men and women spend money in these contexts.
Reinvestment rate.
Yes. The data indicates that when a woman earns income, she reinvests a significantly higher percentage of it back into the household, specifically into child nutrition, clothing, and education.
Whereas men might not be so disciplined.
Well, the research suggests men are statistically more likely to spend on personal consumption, alcohol, tobacco, or just things for themselves.
I see.
So lending to women creates a multiplier effect. You aren't just helping that one woman. You are feeding and educating the next generation of the workforce. You are lifting the whole village.
That sounds like a magic bullet. Give women money, save the world. But I feel like we need to be critical here. Is it really that perfect?
No, and the source material is very careful to point out the downsides. We have to remember, these are loans, they are debt.
And debt carries risk.
High risk. If that crop fails due to a drought, or if the sewing business doesn't take off, that woman is now in debt. And because these aren't traditional banks, sometimes the interest rates are quite high.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There have been critiques that microfinance can actually create debt traps for the most vulnerable.
Plus, there is the social pressure aspect the sources mentioned.
Right. Often these loans use social collateral. You form a group with other women in the village, and if you don't pay, the whole group is penalized or cut off.
That sounds intense.
It uses shame and peer pressure as the enforcement mechanism. That is a heavy psychological burden to carry.
So it empowers them with capital, but burdens them with risk. It essentially privatizes the struggle for development onto the shoulders of the women who are already doing the most work.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool, but it's not a cure-all. It fixes the access to capital problem, but it doesn't fix the underlying vulnerability of being poor.
Let's zoom out and synthesize all of this for you. We've looked at the education flip in the U.S., the fertility rates in Nigeria, the wage gap for lawyers, and microloans in rural villages. What is the through line here? What does this all mean?
The core takeaway is that economic development is not a straight line to equality. It is much more like a spiral. As you solve one set of problems, like basic access to education, you unlock a new level of challenges, like the care burden and the leadership gap.
The source used a phrase I really like, the gappy gapping regardless of levels of development.
A bit informal, but highly accurate. It means vigilance is required at every single stage. You cannot just grow your GDP and wait for equality to happen by magic.
It seems like true parity requires three distinct pillars working together.
Right. If we break it down based on the research, first, you need the economic framework. That is, the wealth, the jobs, the infrastructure. You can't have equality in a vacuum. You need a functioning economy.
But that is not enough.
No. Second, you need policy. You need laws that enforce equal pay, laws that provide childcare support, laws that protect land rights for women. The invisible hand of the market won't fix structural bias. The market is efficient, but it isn't necessarily moral.
And the third pillar.
Social norms. This is the hardest one. You have to change the idea that caregiving is strictly women's work and leadership is strictly men's work. Until that cultural software is updated, the economic hardware won't work efficiently.
That is a really powerful framework. It's not just about money. It's about the rules and the culture.
Absolutely. And looking forward, this leads us to a really massive question for the future. Something I think every listener needs to sit with.
Lay it on us.
We talked about how empowering women leads to smaller families. We see it everywhere. As women gain rights and education, birth rates fall.
Right. Japan, South Korea, Italy, they are all shrinking. The U.S. is heading that way.
So if global economic development depends on empowering women, and empowering women leads to shrinking populations?
Then we are designing a global economy that is destined to shrink.
Exactly. Our entire economic model for the last 2 centuries has been based on the idea that more people equals more growth, more workers, more consumers.
Right.
But we are heading toward a future where the workforce will be more gender equal than ever before, but it will also be numerically smaller.
So the question is, can we have infinite growth with a finite or shrinking number of people?
That is the existential question. We might have to redefine what prosperity actually looks like. It might not be about GDP growth anymore. It might be about productivity and quality of life.
That is a huge thought to chew on. Equality isn't just a social justice issue. It's the trigger for a complete rewrite of global capitalism.
It certainly looks that way. The old models might not survive the success of women's empowerment.
Well, on that note, we want you to look around your own workplace today. Look at who is in the entry-level jobs versus who is in the corner office. Count the ratios and ask yourself, what are the invisible structures keeping those numbers where they are?
And are you doing anything to reinforce them or break them?
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Until next time.